Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. Well, I'm hoping this is going to be another encouraging video, but also one that's going to help you consider and think about the types of things you choose to invest your money in. There's no one right way to do any one of these things other than what is right for you. That's one of the things I commonly talk about on this channel is understanding that we're all going to have our different things that we're going to choose to invest in to get us into a better place. And it's going to be as different as our personalities, because the different challenges that we face in life or have to deal with due to our climate or family needs or whatever, there's all kinds of different areas we could cover, is going to have a say in what you need to invest in. And I'm bringing this up because whenever freeze dryers are mentioned, there's people, especially if somebody says anything negative against a freeze dryer, be it me or anyone else, there's always somebody that comes out of the woodwork and starts making a whole bunch of false claims or assumptions about that person and gets just downright nasty and mean about it. And it's really so silly. If you have a freeze dryer or if you have any other kind of equipment that you find necessary for yourself, especially something that costs that much money, there's no reason for you to be offended because somebody else found that not to be a worthy item to invest in. Here's an example for me. I have a pretty expensive grain mill. There was a reason why I put that kind of money into the grain mill, which is, it's a lot more now than it was when I invested in it. And it was kind of a scary thing, but I knew it was the right choice because that way I had the power to grind my own flour and to also be able to do it manually. And also, because of time, I can run it off of electricity or even solar power. Because Patrick built a motor or rebuilt a motor for me to use with it. And he did a video on it years ago. I'll link to down below if you're interested in more about the country living grain mill and the motor that he built and how we use it. But I do rely on that motor quite a bit. But when I first got that grain mill, I was doing it by hand. Now, another person may just find it better and easier for them to go ahead and just stock up on the flours they're going to use than to stock up on the whole grains and then have to always grind them. Or they may find buying a much cheaper model works better for them. It doesn't make them wrong or right. It doesn't make me wrong or right. It means that we're doing what we knew fit best for our style and what we wanted to invest in. And yeah, so it came up again, and this, and I saw a couple people come in and say, well, just because you can't afford it, that for a lot of us who choose not to have a freeze dryer, that has nothing to do with it. It is that we would rather take that money and invest it in something else. That might be part of it. Aside from the fact that not everybody likes freeze-dried food, and no, it is not the best way to put up food. It might be the best for one person. It's not the best for another. Especially, I know plenty of people that just don't like any freeze-dried food. And some of us like some freeze-dried food, but not enough to invest in a freeze dryer and the space that it takes up and all that, but we don't mind dehydrating or canning that same food. The other assumptions were made that these people didn't have a big garden, or the one that really got me was, well, you're not going to be very self-sufficient without a freeze dryer. Well, I'm sorry, that is absolute nonsense. I could say the same thing about a dehydrator. Well, if you don't have an electric dehydrator, that's not very self-sufficient. You know how dumb that statement is? Unless you have a backup means to run that freeze dryer or electric dehydrator in the event of a major grid down situation where you can't get food from the store or you can't put up all the excess from your garden, what are you going to do? That's not very self-sufficient. You need to have a way to put up that food that doesn't depend on electricity. Even though I have electric dehydrators that I love, we have ways that we can put up food that don't involve using electricity at all, even on the solar power. So because solar power, I could tell people, well, you're not self-sufficient enough because you don't have solar power. But you know what I've been preaching, though I love my solar power? I think that's probably the last thing you should ever invest in because it is a huge investment. It is a huge investment. We started small, we built on it over time, and we love having it. If your money's tight, that should be the last thing you look into because you're still dependent on electricity. If you live in an area like ours that doesn't get full sun all the time, in fact, you might only get a total of 3 to 4 months of sun through the whole year, depending on solar power for everything is not the way to go. You're better off learning skills or investing in things such as my Country Living grain mill, which I can operate manually, or my treadle machine, which I operate with my feet, which isn't exactly manually because it's my feet, not my hands, and other such things like that. When we start comparing our own preparedness to somebody else and expecting other people to invest in a big fancy thing like they have, and then we get mad because they don't do it or they don't want to do it, that's like us telling them that, being mad at that same person because they didn't invest in a Rolls Royce when we have one. We don't have one, by the way. I'm not interested in any big fancy car, ever. I would much rather have a vehicle that is dependable and runs. That's all that matters to me. But that doesn't make me less of a human for not wanting to invest in a Rolls Royce or some other very expensive vehicle that I don't need, when I can do everything just fine, far more frugally. So when you do that, when you get mad at people, it's kind of the same thing. There's no reason to get mad. And the same goes the other way around. If you can't afford it, or if you decide, I hate freeze-dried foods, I have no interest in a freeze dryer, there's no reason for you to be mad at people that have one and love it and do videos on it and share it. No reason to be mad. I'm not mad at anyone that does that. My only concern is that when people are getting free freeze dryers and then trying to convince people that it's the only way to put up food, that bothers me. It might be the best way for them, but they shouldn't try to be convincing people it's the only way to put up food when it's not. I mean, people have been dehydrating foods of all kinds, yes, even meats, for centuries. And they did it with the power of the sun or smoking their meats and so on. And it didn't require any electricity. It didn't require any fancy equipment like these dehydrators I have back here, which, by the way, are both the two together are still a fraction of the cost of the smallest freeze dryer one can buy, or anything else that requires power. People have been putting up food that way for many, many years. It's been a tried and true method. So there are definitely benefits to having solar power, to having a Country Living grain mill, to having a freeze dryer. But if those benefits don't outweigh the negatives for you, then it's not the right choice for you. And that's not the way you should go. You should look at investing that money into something more necessary. So here were some examples comparing the largest freeze dryer out there. Well, for the price of one of those, I could get another brand new wood stove that I could either put in this room or we could put on our off-grid piece of property, which we actually already have a wood stove that we bought secondhand for a really good deal as we're working on this off-grid piece. And we've invested in other things, all used items for this off-grid piece. And all these things that we've bought for that so far have cost us less than a single freeze dryer. But these are things that will help us be able to live completely off-grid. And some other things are even just having a generator, though you don't want to be completely dependent on a generator because it requires fuel, either diesel or gas. So unless you can find a way to produce your own diesel, once your fuel runs out, that generator is not going to be any good to you. So it is a good investment for the most part, but anyway, the cost of a generator, just a simple generator like ours, we bought many years ago. It's a Honda. It's a nice quiet one. It's $3,000. It runs what we absolutely need to in the middle of winter when we have power outages and we don't have enough solar power to run things. And so that's our backup. But it only gets used maybe once a year for anywhere from a few hours to 12 hours. And a lot of times we just don't even bother turning it on because we really don't need it. Some other investments we've made over the years that were much wiser investments for us and make us more self-sustainable are things like the Wood Miser wood mill. So we can get logs and we can mill up our own lumber for building our own things. And Patrick has a lot of videos on this. He bought it secondhand. He'd been shopping for one for a few years, trying to find the best deal, the best price that might have a few things that need to be repaired, but things he knew he could fix himself and wasn't too far away. So he was able to get this down in Oregon for a pretty decent price, best price that we were able to find. It did have some things that needed repaired on it. He repaired it, and he's milled up all kinds of boards for ourselves and for other people. He's milled up things for making his own wood crafts of things that he sells, like his tampers and his sock darners and more. And so that was a much better investment than a freeze dryer for us. A few other things would be like the chicken plucker. That's not necessary because you can, if we absolutely had to, we could pluck chickens by hand, but it sure makes the job go a lot faster. And it worked out really well. The first time using it, we took it out to our friend's house. They had a whole bunch of chickens and ducks they were taking out that day. So we took that out there and it made the whole job for everybody much easier and faster. But if we had to, we could pluck the chickens by hand. So, it was a great investment though. I'm really glad we have that. Where somebody else would say, well, that's silly. We'll just pluck the chickens by hand. If you're only doing a couple of chickens a year, then it might be a pretty silly investment. A few other things we've invested in, especially in the past few years, would be the rainwater storage tank, which was actually an old milk tank that we bought to go out on that out-of-town piece of property, the one that's the farthest out, the 6-acre piece. And it's up in the mountains where nobody can find it. We also recently got a meat grinder used, an industrial type meat grinder. When we do get elk or deer, we can actually now grind up our own burger out of that. We don't have to depend on somebody else to do it for us. And we got it used, got a good price on it. That was a great investment. It cost us much less than it would have cost us a freeze dryer, but it's going to be a much better investment for us personally. And then there's the things such as finding better ways to build onto our gardens and more to make them just more efficient all the way around, especially with the climate, getting colder and colder here every year. We're investing in ways that we can help still continue to grow things and help keep us a little more self-sufficient in that way. And we'd rather put our money towards those kind of things. And that includes fencing and different things for the chickens or to keep the chickens out of certain areas. So basically, that's just a few ideas. I could go on and on with the list of things that we've chose to put our money into that were just wiser investments for us personally that may not be for somebody else. For somebody else, investing in a couple of dehydrators or a big fancy freeze dryer might be a much more wise investment. But again, we shouldn't be comparing ourselves to each other and calling each other names because we're doing things different. Okay, that's great. That's great that you're doing that. That's especially great that you're taking what you got there and finding ways to get your money back from it. So not only are you putting up food for yourself, but you're able to either do good things for other people with it or sell some of these items so that you can earn some of that money back to pay for the cost of the overall equipment plus the monthly cost it is for you to run that. And I think that's great and that's wise. That's a wise thing to do. It's just like with my sewing machine. It's been an awesome investment for me over the years. I've had it for, I don't even know how long now. I think it's been at least 8 to 10 years, somewhere in there. And it's been the longest running machine I've had. It's a treadle machine. I don't need power. But I've also, besides just having to make stuff for us, be it clothes or quilts or whatever, I've also been able to earn back the money that went into buying it in the first place by making things like skirts, aprons, and so on that I could turn around and sell, even though I'm not doing that anymore. I did that for a while. Now it's just time. I don't have the time to keep doing that. And investments don't even have to cost money. Your investments can be things like just learning skills, watching YouTube videos and learning how to do something, learning how to sew, learning how to crochet, learning how to knit, learning how to put in your own rainwater catchment system, or basically building your own battery bank for your solar power if you're going to go that route, or learning how to can or whatever. I mean, the list goes on and on. And that's why I put a lot of these videos out, is to help people learn how to do things, but also with the mindset that the way that I'm doing it and the way that I'm showing you is like, maybe it's a food recipe. These are the spices and herbs I like to use. You might want to use something completely different, but use that same basic recipe idea. And even just learning how to do that, learning how to tailor something to suit, that's a skill there too that takes practice. And so we can invest in those things too, and they don't have to cost much or any money. So remember that when you're looking at anyone else or anyone makes a statement, don't assume that it's an attack on you because somebody doesn't want a country living grain mill like you got. That's fine. They might find maybe a Wonder Mill is going to be a better investment for them, or a better investment, like I said, would simply be finding the best way to put up lots of flour that's already ground and ready to go for their needs. One person's way needs to be right for them, and they shouldn't do something just because they feel pressured into do it, but they should, just like with me, I did the research into a freeze dryer. I kind of got excited about possibly getting one at one point until I started researching it and then listening to people that already had one. Some people love it, some people hate it. A lot of people wish they never would have spent the money on it. That, and then the actual scientific research that was not put out by a company trying to sell a product, but just the information. And when I learned that and then did the comparisons, I realized that for us personally, it was not a worthwhile investment. And again, like I've said before, if you want to learn more my reasonings why, I already put out 2 videos. The reason I put those videos out was so that people could understand all this stuff and then weigh it out for themselves. Not to tell people, don't buy a freeze dryer ever, not so I could hate on the freeze drying community, which is so dumb that anybody would even say that, but so that people would have a more balanced way to look at that particular investment. Because for a lot of people, that even those people that can afford it, they might just be barely able to afford it, or they're scrimping and saving those pennies for that because they feel like they got to have it, just to find out they really didn't need it and their money would have been better spent somewhere else. So that's why I do that. So I think it's great that there's people that love it and they're sharing their information about how they're using it. That's what they should be doing. But also understand there's always going to be another side, a negative side to things that some people aren't going to like, and it's not going to suit them. And that's all it boils down to. So make the judgments for yourself based on both sides of a story, and then because it's just like reading reviews on Amazon. You might see this review, this item has 3 stars or 4 stars. Or what are the 1-star ratings? Sometimes I'll go right to the 1-star ratings, and everything that people are complaining about are things that don't matter to me. It's like, I don't care about that. I care about this aspect of that particular item. And so those are the things you got to look at. The reasons I don't want a freeze dryer, they might not be things that bother you or you care about. And the nutrient thing, don't even get me started on that. I cover that in that first video of those 2 videos, and I'll link to both of them down below because it is highly exaggerated. I'll just say that much. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and it got you thinking about how we treat each other, but also thinking about what's going to be the wise investment for you personally, because it does not have to be like what we invest in or anybody else, but what is best for you. And that's all that matters. And your family, of course, the people that have to live with you. So anyway, any thoughts, ideas you'd like to share, please put them in comments down below. And please be loving and polite to each other. That would just make things so much nicer if we could just do that instead of assuming every negative thing is said is an attack on you personally. Don't do that. Just assume that's a person's opinion, and you can share your own as long as you're polite and kind about it and not rude and name calling and making terrible assumptions about people. So anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.